The galaxy was a quiet place, or at least it tried to be. It was a garden, cultivated by a federation of 300 sapient species, all of whom shared one defining trait. They were prey. They were grazers, foragers, herd dwellers, and flock makers. They had evolved on worlds where survival meant running, hiding, or blending in. Their architecture was rounded and soft. Their ships were shielded and fast, designed for escape. Their diplomacy was built on consensus and the desperate need for safety. Then, they found Earth. They found us. We did not fit the mold. We were not prey. We were the things that went bump in the night. We possessed forward-facing eyes, binocular vision designed to lock onto a target and track it through brush and shadow. We had canine teeth meant for tearing. We possessed an adrenaline system that turned fear into aggression, and a skeletal structure built for pursuit, for throwing, and for violence. To the Federation, humanity was a nightmare made flesh. They quarantined us. They embargoed our system. They called us the Predators, a slur spoken in hushed, trembling whispers across 1,000 worlds. They believed that if they let us out, we would consume them all. They were wrong, but it would take the burning of a world to prove it. The system was called Ethelgard. It was the crown jewel of the Federation's agricultural sector, a binary star system home to the Venli, a gentle, fox-like people who had never raised a hand in anger in their entire evolutionary history. Ethelgard was a paradise of rolling golden plains and vertical farming spires that touched the clouds. It was also the first target of the Hive. The Hive was not a member of the Federation. They were not individuals. They were a biological tide, a swarm of chitin and hunger that arrived from the dark space between galaxies. They did not negotiate. They did not pause. They simply consumed. When the Hive fleets arrived in the Ethelgard system, the Federation Navy did what it was designed to do. It panicked. It prioritized the evacuation of high-ranking officials and retreated to establish a defensive line 3 systems away. The Venli were left behind, billions of them. Captain Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of the TNS Grendel. It was an ugly ship. Human ships were not elegant curves of white alloy and blue light. The Grendel was a block of grey composite armor, scarred by micrometeoroids, bristling with kinetic railguns and nuclear silos. It looked like a brick wrapped in barbed wire. It was built for war, a concept the Federation found repulsive. Yet it was the only thing standing on the border of the quarantine zone when the distress signal cracked through the void. The bridge was silent, save for the hum of the fusion drive, a caged star growling in the belly of the beast. Thorne looked at the holographic display. It showed the Federation blockade ships engaging their warp drives, fleeing away from Ethelgard. It showed the red tide of the Hive closing in on the planet. His communications officer, Lieutenant Sarah Vance, looked up from her console. Her face was pale, illuminated by the harsh orange glow of her screens. She reported that the Federation High Command had issued a general retreat order. They had declared Ethelgard a lost cause. They were sealing the hyperlanes. Thorne looked at the tactical map. He looked at the estimated casualty count. 4 billion souls. He asked if the Federation knew the Grendel was patrolling the border. Vance nodded. She said they had ordered humanity to hold position and not interfere, citing the risk of contamination. They were more afraid of a single human ship entering their space than they were of the swarm eating their children. Thorne adjusted his uniform. It was stiff, utilitarian, charcoal gray. He keyed the ship-wide comms. His voice did not tremble. It was the voice of a predator, deep and resonant. a growl that promised violence. He told the crew that they had been given an order to stand down. He told them that the galaxy viewed them as monsters, as bloodthirsty beasts incapable of higher reasoning or empathy. He told them that 4 billion innocents were about to die screaming because the so-called civilized universe was too afraid to bleed. He paused. Then he said, "Let us show them what a monster can do." The Grendel broke quarantine. The fusion drives flared a brilliant, angry white, and the ship tore a hole through subspace, screaming toward Ethelgard. When the Grendel dropped out of warp in the upper orbit of the planet, the devastation had already begun. The sky was filled with the debris of orbital stations. The Hive ships were massive, organic teardrops the size of cities, dropping millions of landing pods onto the surface. The atmosphere was streaked with fire. On the surface, in the capital city of Oakhaven, a Venli governor named Kale huddled in the command bunker. He was shaking. His fur was matted with sweat. The screens showed the evacuation transports burning on the launch pads. The Federation had abandoned them. The herd had left the weak to die. That was the law of nature. The predator eats the slow. Then, the proximity alarm screamed. Not the high-pitched wail of a Hive vessel, but a low, guttural thrum that shook the teeth in his skull. Kyle looked at the sky sensor. A single ship had appeared. It did not have the smooth curves of a savior. It was jagged. It was ugly. It was terrifyingly fast. The Grendel did not break. It did not enter a standard orbit. It accelerated. Thorn ordered the weapons free. This was not a surgical strike. This was a brawl. Human warfare was distinct in the galaxy because we did not rely solely on energy weapons. Lasers cauterized. They were clean. Humans used kinetics. We threw rocks, very fast, very heavy rocks. The Grendel's spinal railguns fired. 3 tungsten slugs, each the size of a school bus, were accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. They slammed into the nearest Hive mothership. There were no shields that could stop simple Newtonian physics, delivered with that much hate. The impact didn't just penetrate the Hive ship, it shattered it. The organic vessel burst like a ripe fruit, spraying ichor and carapace into the void. For a moment, the battle paused. The Hive, a singular consciousness spread across millions of drones, seemed to stutter. They had calculated the resistance of the prey. They had not calculated this. On the bridge, Thorn watched the swarm turn. Hundreds of smaller attack craft peeled away from the planet's atmosphere and swarmed toward the Grendel. They looked like a cloud of angry hornets rising to sting a bear. Thorn ordered the point defense cannons to auto-fire. He ordered the helm to take them into the atmosphere. The crew did not hesitate. This was the human trait the galaxy feared most. It wasn't our teeth. It was our insanity. We did not value survival above all else. We valued victory. We valued spite. The Grendel hit the upper atmosphere burning. The heat shields glowed cherry red. Inside the ship, the gravity fluctuated, slamming the crew into their harnesses. Outside, the hull was engulfed in plasma. The Hive fighters tried to follow, but their organic wings burned up. They weren't built for a combat re-entry at Mach 20. The Grendel was. The human ship screamed over the capital city of Oakhaven, a burning meteor of defiance. The sonic boom shattered windows for 10 miles. As it leveled out, barely 5,000 feet above the ground, the cargo bay doors opened. We did not just bring a ship, we brought the pack. Drop pods launched from the belly of the Grendel. They were coffins of steel and ceramic, fired directly into the streets where the Hive ground forces were slaughtering the Venli militia. Governor Kale watched on the monitor as the pods slammed into the city square. The concrete cracked. dust billowed. The hive warriors, six-legged insectoids with scythes for arms, chittered and surrounded the craters. They expected soft prey to crawl out. They expected weeping. Instead, the bolts blew. The doors hissed open. Out walked the Terran Marines. They were encased in powered assault armor, painted in camouflage patterns that made no sense to the colorblind hive. They carried rotary cannons and combat shotguns. They did not run. They did not hide. The first Marine, a giant of a man whose armor bore the painting of a grinning skull, stepped forward. A hive warrior lunged, screeching. The Marine didn't shoot. He caught the alien's scythe arm in one armored gauntlet, the servos in his suit whining, and with a sickening crunch, he snapped the limb like a dry twig. Then, he raised his other hand and introduced the alien to the concept of a point-blank kinetic impact. The roar of human gunfire erupted across the city. It was a sound the galaxy had never heard, the thunder of chemical propellants. It was loud, dirty, and utterly terrifying. Thorn watched the telemetry from the bridge. The Grendel was taking fire from the heavy hive cruisers, still in orbit. The shields were buckling. The armor was melting under plasma barrages. Lieutenant Vance shouted that the reactor coolant was leaking. Hull integrity was at 60%. Thorn didn't care about the ship. He cared about the line. He ordered the ship to hold position over the city, acting as a massive umbrella. The Grendel's point defense cannons wove a curtain of lead and flak, intercepting the orbital bombardment meant for the civilians below. The ship shook violently. Sparks showered from the ceiling. A console exploded, sending a crewman flying. Thorn wiped a trickle of blood from his forehead. He grabbed the comms. He needed to speak to the planet. Down in the bunker, Kale heard the voice. It translated through his headset, harsh and guttural. It said, "This is the Terran Navy vessel Grendel. We are holding the sky. Keep your heads down. We are not leaving." Kale stared at the speaker. He had been taught that humans were mindless eaters, that they lacked the soul of a sentient being. But as he watched the tactical feed, he saw the human soldiers moving with impossible coordination. They were throwing themselves in front of Venli civilians. He saw a human medic, distinctive by the red cross on her armor, dragging a wounded Venli child to cover while firing a pistol with her free hand. She was snarling, baring her teeth, but she wasn't biting the child. She was guarding it. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. They were predators, yes, but they were territorial. And for some insane reason, they had decided that this city, these people, were their territory. The battle raged for 3 hours. The Grendel was dying. It was a ruin of twisted metal and venting atmosphere. The hive had realized that the ship wouldn't move, so they decided to ram it. A massive hive cruiser, 3 times the size of the human vessel, began a suicide dive. Thorn saw it coming. He had no main guns left. The railguns were melted slag. The missiles were dry. He had one option left. The option that only a species evolved to throw rocks would think of. He looked at his helmsman. He gave the order. Ramming speed. The helmsman grinned. It was a terrifying expression, lips pulled back to show white teeth. He pushed the throttle to the maximum. The Grendel did not try to dodge the massive cruiser. It turned its nose directly toward it. The engines screamed, pushing the ship past its structural limits. On the ground, Kale and the survivors looked up. They saw the human ship, a burning arrow, launch itself upward. It collided with the hive cruiser in the lower atmosphere. The sound was apocalyptic. The Grendel, dense and heavy, punched through the organic hull of the hive ship like a bullet through flesh. It drove deep into the center of the enemy vessel, And then, its fusion core went critical. A second sun bloomed in the sky of Ethelgard. The shockwave cleared the clouds for 1,000 miles. The Hive cruiser disintegrated, its command structure vaporized in an instant. With the synaptic link severed, the Hive drones on the ground went catatonic. They stopped fighting. They stood still, confused, before the remaining Marines and the emboldened Venli militia cut them down. Silence fell over the city. The sky was raining ash and debris. Kale emerged from the bunker. He walked out into the ruined square. The air smelled of ozone and burning copper. He saw the human soldiers. There were only a few left standing. Their armor was scorched, their visors cracked. They were exhausted. One of them, the giant with the skull painted on his chest, sat on a pile of rubble. He had removed his helmet. His face was covered in soot and sweat. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked up as Kyle approached. Kyle froze. Instinct told him to run. This was a monster, a killer, a thing that had just destroyed a city-sized ship with its own body. The human looked at the small, fox-like alien. The human's eyes were tired. Slowly, painfully, the human reached into a pouch on his belt. Kyle flinched. Was this it? Was he to be eaten now? The human pulled out a canteen of water. He took a sip, swished it around his mouth, and spat out blood. Then, he held the canteen out to Kale. "You okay, little guy?" the human rasped. The translator struggled with the informal tone, but conveyed the meaning. Kale stared at the water. Then he looked at the sky, where the debris of the Grendel sparkled like diamonds. "Why?" Kyle asked. "Why did you come?" "We left you in the dark. We feared you." The human chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Yeah, well, we're used to the dark." He gestured around at the other Marines, who were tending to the wounded Venli, applying bandages with hands that could crush stone. "And you know the thing about predators, Governor?" Kyle shook his head. "We hunt," the Marine said, his eyes hardening. "But we also protect the pack. And nobody hurts the pack." "We are not your pack," Kyle whispered. The human smiled again. It wasn't scary this time. It was sad and fierce and incredibly weary. "You were in trouble. You sent a call. In my book, that makes you pack." The Federation fleets arrived 2 days later. They came in force, expecting to find a dead world stripped to the bedrock. They expected to find the Hive feasting. Instead, they found Ethelgard battered but alive. They found the Venli emerging from the shelters, and standing guard over the landing zones, refusing to let the Federation soldiers disarm them, were the remnants of the Terran Marines. The Federation Admiral, a prey species with wide, fearful eyes, demanded an explanation. He looked at the wreckage of the Hive fleet. He looked at the orbital graveyard, where the Grendel had sacrificed itself. He couldn't process it. Why would the monsters die for the sheep? Kale stood before the Admiral. The small Venli governor seemed taller now. He stood next to the human Marine commander. "They are dangerous," the Admiral insisted, pointing a trembling finger at the humans. "They are unstable. They have the bloodlust." Kyle looked at the human, then back at the Admiral. "Yes," Kale said. "They are dangerous. They are violent. They have teeth that can tear and claws that can break." He stepped between the Admiral and the human. "And thank the stars for that," Kale declared, "because the universe is full of things that want to eat us, Admiral. And you ran away. They ran toward us." The Federation Council watched the footage in silence. They saw the Grendel burn. They saw the humans forming a wall of flesh and steel around Venli children. They saw the nature of the predator. It wasn't just about hunger. It was about tenacity. It was about the refusal to accept death. It was the evolutionary trait that allowed a hairless ape to walk out of the African savanna and challenge the gods themselves. Humanity was lifted from quarantine. We were not fully trusted, not yet. We were still too loud, too aggressive, too frightening to the gentle herds of the galaxy. But we were no longer the monsters under the bed. We were the guard dogs sleeping by the door. And as the hive regrouped in the dark void, preparing for a war that would span centuries, they learned a new fear. They had assumed the galaxy was a buffet. They had assumed the prey would always run. They didn't know that the prey had made a friend that didn't know how to quit, a friend that would burn the sky before it let the darkness win. The galaxy was a garden, yes, but every garden needs a gardener with a shovel and a willingness to kill the weeds. And humanity? We were very, very good at killing weeds. This is the story of how the prey learned to stop running. This is the story of the day the Federation looked into the eyes of a monster and saw a brother. Humanity, fuck yeah.